Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. So today, I wanted to take a look at this lane matchup between DRX Zeka's Akali and IW Serin's Azir. So this was a Worlds match played a couple days ago, and I think it showed Zeka's just got a really solid understanding of the melee versus range matchup, especially this Akali Azir matchup in particular. And I really want to show you guys how his aggression helped him actually win a bad matchup, especially a matchup that's bad early, and how you guys can use it in your games as well. So this is a matchup where Azir definitely has the advantage pre-6. Post-6, Akali can start kind of getting it back, but definitely you're expecting to be behind pre-6, and then that kind of item advantage from being behind pre-6 is going to carry on to around level 7 or 8, and from that point on, Akali can start to win. Now, the big advantage Akali does have in this matchup, despite it being a bad matchup, is that you have a big sustain advantage. So if you're looking at the champs here, we've got Doran's Ring 2 potions against Doran's Shield and second wind. So Akali's going to have a lot more sustain, and that means if you can trade damage evenly like this, it's actually better for Akali. In fact, you can actually trade kind of at a slight deficit and it'll still be good for you just because you have so much more sustain than your opponent. So one thing I think I want you guys to really pay a lot of attention to is how even though it's a bad matchup, you still got to be reasonably aggressive. And there's ways you can be aggressive even without your abilities and stuff. So you can see here, he's playing quite aggressive on the wave, knowing that he has a lot of sustain and making sure that Azir takes a ton of creep damage every time he does this. And so it's kind of weird, but you'll actually see that on the first wave, Azir has taken half of his HP bar and used a health potion already. And this has been it kind of looks weird, right? Because he hasn't actually attacked him that much other than at level 1, but you can see that the positioning was quite aggressive. He was moving in a way that kind of forced Azir to auto attack him, but as long as he played within the creep wave, it would actually make Azir take quite a lot of damage from the creeps. I actually want to show you another thing here, is that, again, this kind of aggressive positioning. It's one thing to be kind of just playing really far back here and trying to bait out the WQ from Azir and then trying to kite it out. But you'll actually see here that what good players will do is when Azir uses this cooldown forward, he will actually move into Azir rather than away from him. This kind of pressures him a little bit off the wave. It might have forced out Azir's W, in which case he can walk back. Azir decided not to use it, but you can see that he's kind of forcing Azir to make decisions and kind of looking to skill check him. He's kind of forcing Azir to make the right decisions rather than just sitting back and doing nothing. You can see again here, uses the W to kind of buy himself a little bit of space. And I think this is something that I really see a lot of lower elo melee players mess up a lot, is their ranged opponent will use cooldowns and they won't take any advantage of it. That's really the window you're looking for, is whenever your opponent uses a cooldown to kind of walk into them like this. Sometimes you are just going to take damage, as you can see here, but the nice thing is that you have the sustain to make up for it. So here I think he was going to try and freeze the wave. Azir doesn't let him. Makes sense. Probably going to take a fair amount of damage under tower here. Honestly, not too much you can do to avoid this. You can use your W, obviously, which is good, but it's a long cooldown. It's definitely worth it, though. It is going to make you take a fair amount less damage here. Pretty much as long as you don't get low enough that Azir can actually all-in you, it doesn't matter too much what your HP is actually on. And Azir is not that good at all-inning early, especially without Ignite, so as long as he doesn't drop below maybe 10-20% health, he's pretty much fine to just keep trading damage back and forth. Here, Azir's going to walk down. This is kind of all good for him. Now, this is really good as well. So you can see here, actually forces the cooldown out of him. I really want you guys to take this away from this replay, is that even in bad matchups, you're still looking for opportunities to, one, force cooldowns out of your opponent, either by moving aggressively into them with your cooldowns, positioning aggressively on the wave, and then when they use those cooldowns, you can then use that to kind of buy space for yourself, or just to kind of buy time almost, to allow yourself to farm a bit more and allow your sustain to keep coming up. Because unless your opponent can harass you on cooldown and you don't really do anything about it, most of the time they won't actually be able to get through your sustain. So if you can kind of buy yourself a little bit of freedom just by playing aggressively, making sure they have to use some spells defensively, some cooldowns kind of wasted, that makes lanes like this a lot easier. You can see here again, actually moving into him. So it's very rare that you kind of see this thing where an Akali is the one actually zoning Azir off the wave. And you can see right here, playing, I always say this, even in range matchups and stuff like that, if you want to deny CS or make someone feel pressured, you want to stand next to the CS they're trying to get, because it makes them choose between harassing you and harassing the CS. And so here, when Azir uses the Q to kind of get Akali off him to kind of try move her away, rather than moving away, she knows that Azir is now missing like his main trading skill, right? So she can just use her W to zone him off the wave. Again, buy herself a little bit of time. All during this time, she is regenning HP and not taking damage. So you'll see, if we just go back to that. So right now, when she uses her W, 366 HP. And during this time, if she weren't playing aggressively, she would probably be taking damage for free by Azir's Ws when she would go for this CS. But instead, during this whole time, she's regenning HP. So again, like using that aggression to buy yourself time to just like regen in these matchups. Again, trading a little bit of damage evenly is perfectly fine, given that you're going to out-sustain. You can actually see that Azir now has no potions whatsoever. And Akali, she has used a potion that's just ticking now. Still has the Dawn Shield in the second wind, so going to be able to sustain up quite a bit still. But so far, like I think Akali is very happy with how the lane is going. Like Azir is not really getting as much done as he would like. In fact, as you can see here again, Akali is the one playing aggressively on CS, and Azir is kind of the one being forced to CS at that max range. So it's going really good for him, honestly. I think you can be really happy with the position you're in. Again, this is like most of these like melee versus range matchups where you're kind of getting poked down a lot. Typically you have like longer cooldowns than your opponent, but when you have your cooldowns up, generally you're stronger. Like if you think of champions like Akali, like Fizz or whatever, they have like very strong trading windows, but then they're kind of like useless for a fair amount like outside that. But if you can use those windows again to like really play aggressively, maybe force some cooldowns out of your opponent, or use your movement and your positioning to force cooldowns out of your opponent, even when your cooldowns are down, that can be really valuable. So this kind of position here, this is super, super good for Akali. So not only is she up CS, which is honestly kind of a miracle in this matchup, it really speaks to how well he's played the matchup, but Azir is now too low to really pressure Akali at all, and she is allowed to free farm. And so, while you could look to base and TP here, the sums on the sides are actually bugged, but Akali and Azir both have TP here. It's actually kind of good if Akali can just keep the Azir in lane. While she could base right now and like try and set up a freeze, Azir will be able to come back and pressure the lane. She doesn't really want that. Like the longer this lane kind of like stays in this state where Azir can't like abuse or oppress Akali for having a weak early game, and Azir actually having a strong early game, you can kind of see that Azir just can't really do anything. He's not getting anything done. Again, I'd say Akali, like while Akali gets outscaled by Azir in the very late game, for most of the mid game, I'd say Akali is more effective than Azir, as long as you don't fall behind in this like very early game here. So if you can just keep the lane in this position, like both of you not basing here is actually better for Akali. If you base here and Azir bases here, now he has the mana to harass you. He's not all inable anymore because he's probably full HP. But actually here, when Azir doesn't really have the mana to kill Akali, and is forced to kind of use his cooldowns just to buy space for himself, Akali is allowed to do whatever she wants. So you can see that she is just actually allowed to walk up and CS the creeps, is actually going to push a wave in and force Azir to base. So if you look at this, if you kind of just like pause this, this is a matchup that is considered bad for Akali early game, and she's up a sizable amount of CS and also XP, and actually managed to force their opponent to TP to lane first. So this is like really, really good for Akali. Normally you wouldn't win this matchup to around level 7, level 8, because your opponent would have an item lead, but she has actually won with the item lead now, and an XP lead. So it's going really, really well for Akali, and I think she is definitely in the winning position now. Comes back to mid. So when you've got this lead over an opponent like this, now you're going to have XP advantage and you're going to have item advantage. So at this point, it's like no longer really considered a bad matchup. Like now you just have advantages and you can look to trade quite aggressively. And you'll see that here. She's going to make sure to play aggressively on the lane. Really isn't just going to let Azir poke her out. She's going to use her cooldowns. And actually you can see here that Azir feels scared enough that he just uses his harass spell just to kind of deter Akali from trading there. Even though she wasn't looking for it, right? After she went for that initial trade. And again, that's buying her time. While Azir doesn't have Q here, he can't do anything to her, and she's just allowed to push in this wave. And this is insane. Like, Akali pushing in an Azir, that's just amazing. It actually is just amazing. Gonna sit here for a while. Azir is forced to use mana on the wave. Now you could position and try look for an all-in here by freezing the wave on your side, but it's pretty unlikely. Like Azir's full HP. It's kind of unlikely in most competitive games that you're going to be able to set up for solo kills like this, but you can still build an advantage like this. Again, you can see how she's like forcing Azir to CS either with his W or use Q to buy space for himself, and that means that he can never use these cooldowns on Akali, and Akali's just getting to lane for free. So this is a really, really nice position to be in. Obviously up a fair amount of CS in a matchup that's bad early game, and especially like even like most Akali matchups, some that are even good, you still kind of expect to be down a little bit of CS just because your champ's not that good at farming, whereas like a lot of these other champs are. So yeah, I mean, I can't really say it anymore. He's just playing the matchup really, really well. Got 6 out of 6 on that wave, a little bit of method CSing. Now, this is a base that I think some people would find kind of curious, but I want to explain why it's done. So when you're in a matchup like this, when you're playing something like Azir versus Akali, you really want to pressure the map. You want to be playing for objectives. You just like want to be really strong. So this is more of a competitive thing, but you can still use it in solo queue. So here, they really want to fight for either this dragon or this herald. And because Akali doesn't have TP, it's quite hard for her to like push Azir in and get like super priority and get to one of these, just because Azir has enough wave clear that while he can get pushed in, since Akali has an advantage, he can actually clear out most of the wave in time. So Akali's basically, any fight that Akali goes to, like if she walks to Herald or she walks to Dragon, she can pretty much guarantee that Azir is coming as well. She doesn't have enough push that she can just like make sure he can't come at all. So one kind of clever thing that you can do in these matchups is if you want to force priority for yourself is actually to base first. As long as you guys are actually playing for an objective. Like you can see on the map that they're pinging that they actually want to play Herald, and you'll see in a moment that this ends up they fight the Dragon instead. But because they have in mind that they really want to play for these objectives, Akali's just like, okay, I'm going to base and I'm just going to be as strong as possible for Herald. And because she based first, and because Azir was kind of losing the matchup and couldn't push the wave in as fast as he would like, Azir has to make a choice. He can either base, or he won't be here for this fight. And so he decides to stay here for this fight. But now, if we just look at the gold, Akali has spent all her gold, whereas Azir has 950 gold in the bank. So basically, Akali realized that she wants skirmishes. She doesn't want the isolated 1v1, and also, she knew that her team was setting up for objectives. They were planning to do the Herald, so she can just base right now, get like super priority over her lane, because Azir will either have to base here, or he will have to come to this fight. And that just means that she's going to be really just way stronger in this team fight. You know, if Azir bases, this is a 5v4, or I guess it's a 4v3. And if Azir stays, he's just like way weaker than Akali. And you'll kind of see that she just plays the fight pretty damn well. Not too much she could have done better, I don't think. Kind of kills everyone. Managed to kill Trundle without having to use her R2, which is really nice. And again, got the damage on both of the carries there. Both the Kalista and the Azir. Cleans up the fight very nicely. Ends up coming out 3-0. Yeah, 3-0. So just like, this is an insane position to be in. Like normally you would think that Azir would have kind of advantage over Akali in the early game. Instead, she's up 1100 gold. And I think actually after pushing this wave, she's up even more. Yeah, it's like she's up almost 30 CS in this matchup. So it's really, really impressive. So that's kind of TLDR. I think the main things were she bought herself a lot of time and a lot of space by positioning like pretty aggressively, forcing cooldowns out of your opponent. I think that's quite important. You can't rely on your opponents just to waste their cooldowns all the time. Maybe you can in low elo, but as you get higher up, you really need to actively force cooldowns out of your opponent, and you can do that with like aggressive positioning. I also think she used really well her sustain advantage. She knew that she could take trades evenly, and that would go really well for her. And also, I think this last base here was really smart. If you're a champion that really wants to skirmish, oftentimes basing first is actually good, because it's going to mean that you're back on the map, and then your opponent will either have to base and give you a kind of wave of priority for free, or your opponent will stay and they'll be forced to fight kind of at a gold deficit. So guys, that's going to be it for this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I'm really looking for feedback on these kind of videos. I want to do a lot of stuff around worlds, but I want to know what you guys think of it. Stuff like, would you like to see other lanes, like maybe ADC or top or whatever? Is there specific matchups you guys like to see? Would you perhaps like to see stuff like team fighting in the mid game as well? Like maybe not in one whole video, but separate into other videos. Is the length of the video good? Stuff like that. Basically, I just want to know kind of like what you guys think of the video in general, like the format and stuff like that, if it's useful. And of course, if you liked it and stuff like that. One thing I'll quickly answer, since I know you guys are going to ask, is where did you get the replay files? Unfortunately, they're not available to the public, and I was kind of just lucky enough to get access to them myself. So if you have any specific matchups you'd like to see, please let me know. So as always, guys, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.